The soft morning light filtered through the thin curtains of the Yamamoto family's small apartment in Kyoto. In the corner of their modest living room stood an upright piano, its wood slightly worn from years of use. 4-year-old Akiko sat on the floor, watching as her mother's fingers danced across the keys, filling their home with the gentle melodies of a Chopin nocturne. When her mother finished and went to prepare lunch, little Akiko climbed onto the piano bench. She reached out her tiny hands and, to everyone's surprise, began to play back the melody she had just heard. Not perfectly, of course, but with enough accuracy that her mother dropped the bowl she was holding and rushed back into the room. "How did you do that?" her mother asked, eyes wide with wonder. Akiko shrugged her small shoulders. "I just played what I heard," she said simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. That evening, when her father returned from his job at the local high school where he taught mathematics, her mother pulled him aside. They spoke in hushed tones, occasionally glancing at their daughter, who was now attempting to pick out another tune on the piano. "We don't have much money for lessons," her father said, running his hand through his hair. "But we can't ignore this gift," her mother replied, determination in her voice. "My cousin Hiro teaches beginner piano. Perhaps he would give her lessons at a discount." And so began Akiko's journey with the piano. Cousin Hiro agreed to teach her once a week, charging only half his usual fee. From the very first lesson, he was astonished by the child's natural ability. "In 30 years of teaching, I've never seen a child like her," he told her parents after the third lesson. "She doesn't just play the notes. She feels them." By age 5, Akiko had outgrown Cousin Hiro's teaching abilities. He recommended her to a proper piano teacher, Mrs. Tanaka, who rarely accepted students younger than 8. But after hearing Akiko play for just 5 minutes, Mrs. Tanaka made an exception. "Your daughter has a rare gift," she told Akiko's parents. "It would be wrong of me to turn her away." Life changed for the Yamamoto family. Every yen they could spare went toward Akiko's piano lessons. Her mother took on extra sewing work, and her father tutored students in the evenings. Sometimes, when they thought Akiko was asleep, she would hear them worrying about money in low voices. But they never once suggested stopping her lessons. By age 7, Akiko was playing pieces that Mrs. Tanaka usually assigned to her teenage students. Bach, Mozart, Beethoven, the great composers became Akiko's friends, their music speaking to her in ways that sometimes words could not. One afternoon, after Akiko had been playing for 3 hours straight, Mrs. Tanaka made a phone call while the girl was taking a break. "Professor Nakamura," she said into the receiver, "I know you don't teach children, but there's someone you need to hear." 2 days later, a stern-looking elderly man with thick glasses visited their apartment. Professor Nakamura was the most respected piano teacher at the Kyoto Conservatory, known for training some of Japan's finest pianists. He rarely left the conservatory, preferring that students come to him. But today was an exception. Akiko, suddenly shy, hid behind her mother when he arrived. "Play for the professor," her mother encouraged gently. With a deep breath, Akiko sat at the piano. She chose Chopin's Waltz in a Minor, a piece she had been working on for weeks. As she played, her small body swayed with the music, her expression changing with each shift in the composition. When she finished, the room was silent. Professor Nakamura cleared his throat. "How old are you, child?" he asked. 7 years and 4 months, Akiko replied politely. He nodded, then turned to her parents. "I have never accepted a student under the age of 12, he said. "But exceptions must be made for exceptional talent." And so, at age 7, Akiko became the youngest student ever to study under Professor Nakamura at the Kyoto Conservatory. The other students, mostly teenagers and young adults, were at first amused by the tiny girl who needed a special cushion to reach the piano properly. But their amusement quickly turned to respect, and sometimes even jealousy as they heard her play. Life became busier than ever. Akiko attended regular school in the mornings, then rushed to the conservatory for lessons and practice in the afternoons. Her mother would pack onigiri rice balls for her to eat on the train, knowing there would be no time for a proper dinner on most days. Professor Nakamura was strict but fair. He never treated Akiko differently because of her age, expecting the same dedication and perfection he demanded from all his students. When she made a mistake, he would tap his cane on the floor once, a sound that made everyone in the practice room sit up straighter. "Again," he would say. But this time, don't just play the notes. Tell me a story with them. Sometimes, after particularly long practice sessions, Akiko would fall asleep on the train home, her head resting on her mother's shoulder. Her mother would stroke her hair, a mixture of pride and worry in her eyes. Was this too much for a child? But whenever she suggested a day off, Akiko would shake her head firmly. "The piano is waiting for me," she would say. "It gets lonely if I don't visit." By her 8th birthday, Akiko had her first public recital at a small community hall. Her parents invited everyone they knew, neighbors, colleagues, distant relatives who had never even met the child prodigy they had heard so much about. The night before the recital, Akiko couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned, imagining all the faces that would be watching her, all the ears that would be listening for mistakes. Her father came to sit on the edge of her bed. "Are you nervous?" he asked. Akiko nodded, clutching her blanket. "That's good," he said, surprising her. "Nervousness means you care. It means what you're doing matters." "But what if I make a mistake?" she whispered. Her father smiled. "Then you'll keep playing just like you do in life when things don't go perfectly. The most beautiful music isn't perfect, it's honest." The next day, Akiko walked onto the small stage wearing a new dress her mother had sewn specially for the occasion. The community hall was packed, with people even standing at the back. As she bowed and then sat at the piano, she felt her heart racing. For a moment, her mind went blank. She couldn't remember the first note of the Bach piece she was supposed to play. Panic rose in her throat. Then in the front row, she saw her father nod encouragingly. She remembered his words. "The most beautiful music is honest." Taking a deep breath, Akiko placed her hands on the keys and began to play. Not Bach as planned, but Chopin, the nocturne she had heard her mother play all those years ago. She played it from memory, from her heart, adding her own small flourishes that made Professor Nakamura raise his eyebrows in the audience. When she finished, there was a moment of silence, then thunderous applause. People were standing, some with tears in their eyes. Professor Nakamura, who rarely showed emotion, was nodding with approval. That night, after everyone had gone home and Akiko was helping her mother wash the teacups, she asked, "Was it okay that I played Chopin instead of Bach?" Her mother kissed the top of her head. "It was more than okay. It was exactly right." In the years that followed, Akiko's reputation grew beyond their neighborhood, beyond even Kyoto. She was invited to play at school events, then city events. A local newspaper wrote a small article about her, calling her Kyoto's piano princess. Professor Nakamura, usually so reserved with praise, began to speak of competitions and conservatories abroad. But through it all, Akiko remained the same thoughtful, somewhat shy girl who still practiced on the worn upright piano in their apartment, even though she now had access to grand pianos at the conservatory. When asked why, she would say simply, "This one knows me best." By the time she turned 10, it was clear to everyone that Akiko Yamamoto was not just another talented child who would grow up to be a good musician. There was something special in the way she connected with the piano, in the way music seemed to flow not just from her fingers but from her very soul. "She plays like someone who has lived many lifetimes," a visiting conductor remarked after hearing her. "There is joy in her music, yes, but also understanding of sorrow, of longing, of hope. How does one so young know these things?" No one could answer that question, least of all Akiko herself. She only knew that when she played, especially Chopin, she felt most alive, most herself, most connected to something larger than her young life had yet to fully understand. The years passed quickly for Akiko. Days blended into weeks, weeks into months, and soon she was celebrating her 13th birthday. Her life had fallen into a rhythm as steady as a metronome. School in the mornings, piano practice in the afternoons, homework in the evenings, and whenever she could find extra time, more piano. Their apartment had changed a bit over the years. The old upright piano had been joined by a slightly better one, a gift from Professor Nakamura when he retired from the conservatory. "For my most promising student," he had said, his usual stern expression softening just a little. "So you can practice properly at home." Akiko's bedroom walls, once bare except for a calendar, were now covered with concert programs, certificates from music competitions, and a poster of her favorite pianist Martha Argerich. Her shelves held trophies alongside her manga collection and stuffed animals. A teenager's room that somehow bridged two worlds. At school, Akiko was quiet, but well-liked. Her classmates had grown used to her rushing off after the final bell, her absence from most social events, her tendency to tap her fingers on her desk during math class, as if playing an invisible piano. They respected her dedication, even if they didn't fully understand it. "Don't you ever get tired of practicing?" her friend Yuki asked one day as they walked home. It was a rare afternoon when Akiko didn't have to rush to the conservatory. Akiko thought about it. "Sometimes my fingers get tired," she admitted, "and sometimes my back hurts from sitting so long. But the music itself? No, I never get tired of that." Yuki shook her head, smiling. "You're weird, Akiko, but the good kind of weird." At 14, Akiko was accepted into the junior division of the prestigious Tokyo Music Academy, which meant traveling to Tokyo every weekend for intensive classes. Her parents worried about the cost and the strain of the long journey, but Akiko's new teacher, Mr. Tanaka, who had replaced the retired Professor Nakamura, insisted it was necessary for her development. "There are things she can learn there that we cannot teach her here," he explained. "She needs to be challenged by peers at her level." And so every Friday after school, Akiko and her mother would board the bullet train to Tokyo, where they would stay in a tiny, budget hotel room for 2 nights before returning late Sunday. The hotel room barely fit 2 futons, and they shared a bathroom with other guests down the hall. But neither complained. During these weekends, Akiko met young musicians from all over Japan, many of whom had been playing since they were toddlers. For the first time, she wasn't the youngest or the most talented in the room. It was both humbling and exhilarating. "You play Chopin beautifully," an older student named Hiroshi told her after hearing her perform in class. "But your Bach needs work. You're too emotional with it." Instead of feeling hurt, Akiko nodded thoughtfully. "Can you show me what you mean?" These weekends became a kind of musical feast for Akiko. She soaked up new techniques, discovered pieces she'd never heard before, and began to develop her own distinct style. Her teachers noted that while she excelled at all the classical composers, she had a special connection to Chopin. There was something in the Polish composer's romantic, emotional works that seemed to speak directly to her soul. "When you play Chopin," her Tokyo teacher told her, "we forget you're a young girl from Kyoto. You become something else entirely, a channel for the music itself." Life continued this way until the spring of Akiko's 15th year, when everything changed. She had been preparing for an important competition, practicing more intensely than ever. 6, sometimes 7 hours a day, she would play the same difficult passages over and over, pushing herself toward perfection. One evening, as she was working through a particularly challenging section of Chopin's Scherzo No. 2, she felt a sharp pain shoot through her right wrist. She stopped playing, flexed her hand, and tried again. The pain returned stronger this time. By morning, her wrist was swollen and she could barely move it without wincing. The doctor's diagnosis was clear: tendinitis caused by overuse. The prescription was equally clear, if devastating: no piano for at least 3 months. 3 months? Akiko repeated, her voice barely a whisper. "But the competition, your health must come first," the doctor said firmly. "If you don't let it heal properly now, you could cause permanent damage." The first week of her forced break, Akiko was inconsolable. She would sit in front of the piano, her right hand wrapped in a brace, and stare at the keys she couldn't play. Her mother found her like this one afternoon, tears streaming silently down her face. "The piano is my voice," Akiko said when her mother sat beside her. "Without it, I don't know who I am." Her mother took her good hand. "Then use this time to find out." The words were simple but profound. Slowly, Akiko began to fill her pianoless hours with other things. She read books about the great composers, especially Chopin, learning about his life, his influences, his struggles. She spent more time with her school friends, discovering the simple joy of being a regular teenager. Most importantly, she listened. With her father's help, she collected recordings of the great pianists playing the pieces she loved: Martha Argerich, Vladimir Horowitz, Christian Zimmermann. She would close her eyes and lose herself in their interpretations, noticing nuances she had missed before, hearing new possibilities in familiar pieces. "I never really listened like this before," she told her father one evening, after they had spent an hour playing different recordings of Chopin's Ballade No. 1. "I was always too busy playing to truly listen." When the 3 months finally ended and the doctor cleared her to play again, Akiko approached the piano differently. She started slowly, just 30 minutes a day, gradually building back her strength and stamina. But something had changed in her playing. Mr. Tanaka noticed it immediately. "There's a new depth to your interpretation," he said after her first lesson back. "You've always had technical skill, but now you're truly making music." The competition she had been preparing for had long passed, but another opportunity soon presented itself. Japan's National Young Pianist Competition was accepting applications, and Mr. Tanaka insisted she enter. "But I've lost so much practice time," Akiko protested, "and gained something far more valuable," he replied. "Trust me." Preparing for the competition was intense but different from before. Akiko was more methodical now, more thoughtful about her practice. She took regular breaks, stretched her hands and wrists, and spent as much time listening and thinking about the music as she did playing it. The day of the competition arrived, cold and rainy. Hundreds of young pianists from across Japan had gathered in Tokyo, all with the same dream. Backstage, Akiko could hear snippets of others warming up. Scales played at lightning speed. Difficult passages repeated over and over. She found a quiet corner and closed her eyes, mentally playing through her piece, Chopin's Ballade No. 1, hearing it just as she wanted to perform it. When her name was called, she walked onto the stage with steady steps, her heart beating in time with the music already playing in her head. The judges' faces were serious, their pens poised to note every mistake, every interpretation choice. Akiko took a deep breath, placed her hands on the keys, and began. From the gentle opening notes to the thunderous conclusion, she played not just with her hands but with her whole being. The months of listening, of thinking, of understanding Chopin as a person as well as a composer poured into her performance. When she hit the final chord, there was a moment of complete silence before the applause began. Later that evening, when they announced she had won first place, Akiko felt strangely calm. The trophy was nice, but it wasn't what mattered most. What mattered was that she had found her voice again. A voice that was richer, more mature, more genuinely her own. "What happens next?" a reporter from a music magazine asked her after the ceremony. Akiko thought for a moment, then smiled. "I keep learning," she said simply. "The music never ends." As her 16th birthday approached, invitations began to arrive, small recitals at first, then larger venues. Mr. Tanaka helped her select which to accept, always mindful of her school responsibilities and the need to continue her development without burning out. "You're not just a pianist," he reminded her. "You're a young person becoming who you're meant to be. The piano is part of that journey, not all of it." Akiko took his words to heart. She maintained her friendships at school, kept up with her studies, and even joined the literature club, discovering a love for poetry that complemented her musical expression. But always, at the center of everything was the piano. It was no longer just an instrument she played, but a partner in her journey, a friend who knew her deepest thoughts, a mirror that reflected her growth not just as a musician but as a human being. As she turned 17, Akiko Yamamoto was no longer just a talented child, but an artist coming into her own. No one, least of all Akiko herself, could have predicted what would happen next. How a single performance would catapult her from a promising young pianist to a global sensation, all because of her profound connection to the music of Chopin. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, printed on thick cream paper with gold lettering. Akiko's mother called her from school, her voice trembling with excitement. "It's from the Tokyo International Music Festival," she said. "They want you to perform." Akiko nearly dropped her phone. The Tokyo International Music Festival was one of Japan's most prestigious classical music events, featuring world-renowned musicians and orchestras. It wasn't the kind of place that invited 17-year-old pianists, no matter how talented. "Are you sure it's not a mistake?" she asked, stepping away from her school friends who were looking at her curiously. "It's addressed to Miss Akiko Yamamoto, first prize winner, National Young Pianist Competition." "That's definitely you," her mother replied with a small laugh. "They want you to perform in 3 weeks. Mr. Tanaka is already calling me on the other line. Come home right after school." That evening, their small apartment was buzzing with activity. Mr. Tanaka arrived just after Akiko, still wearing his teaching clothes from the conservatory. Her father came home early from work, and even Professor Nakamura, who rarely left his home since retiring, showed up leaning on his cane. "This is unprecedented," Mr. Tanaka said, studying the invitation again as if checking for forgery. "They never invite someone so young to perform a solo piece. It says here you'll be in the morning program on the third day," her father noted, reading over Mr. Tanaka's shoulder. "That's usually when they showcase emerging talents." "The morning program means a smaller audience," Professor Nakamura added bluntly. "But it's still the Tokyo International Music Festival. Many careers have been launched from that stage." Akiko sat quietly at the piano bench, trying to absorb the reality of what was happening. 3 weeks to prepare for the biggest performance of her life. Her fingers found the keys unconsciously, playing a soft, thoughtful melody. "What will you perform?" Mr. Tanaka asked, interrupting her thoughts. Without hesitation, Akiko replied, "Chopin's Piano Concerto No. 1. There was a moment of silence. The concerto was a massive undertaking, complex, emotionally demanding, and nearly 40 minutes long. "With an orchestra?" her father asked, his expression concerned. "Have you ever played with an orchestra before?" "No," Akiko admitted. "But the invitation says they can provide the festival orchestra if needed." Mr. Tanaka and Professor Nakamura exchanged looks. "It's ambitious," Mr. Tanaka said carefully. "It's what I want to play," Akiko said, her voice quiet but firm. "It's what I need to play." Professor Nakamura thumped his cane once on the floor, the sound that had made generations of piano students sit up straight. "Then that's what you'll play," he declared. "But we have work to do." The next 3 weeks were the most intense of Akiko's young life. She was excused from afternoon classes at school, with her teachers providing assignments she could complete at night. Every day she practiced for hours under the watchful eyes of both Mr. Tanaka and Professor Nakamura, who seemed to have forgotten his retirement for this special occasion. No, Professor Nakamura would say, thumping his cane. "The second movement is not just beautiful, it's intimate. Play it like you're telling a secret, not giving a speech." For the first time, Akiko also had to practice with a stand-in second piano playing the orchestra parts. Mr. Tanaka arranged for her to rehearse with the full festival orchestra just twice before the performance. Barely enough time to get comfortable with the interplay between piano and orchestra. "They're professionals," he assured her after she expressed worry. "They'll follow your lead. Just be confident in your interpretation and they'll match your energy." The night before the festival, Akiko couldn't sleep. She lay awake in her bed, staring at the ceiling, the notes of the concerto playing endlessly in her mind. Around midnight, she heard a soft knock on her door. "Can't sleep?" her father asked, peeking in. Akiko nodded. He came in and sat on the edge of her bed, just as he had done before her first recital so many years ago. "I'm scared," she admitted. "What if I'm not ready? What if I embarrass myself in front of all those people?" Her father was quiet for a moment. "Do you remember what I told you before your first performance? About nervousness? That it means I care. That it means what I'm doing matters," Akiko recalled. "Exactly. And I'll tell you something else now that you're older. The greatest artists, musicians, painters, writers, they all feel this way before they create something meaningful. It's not about being perfect. It's about being honest with the music and with yourself." He kissed her forehead. "Now try to sleep. Your mother and I will be there tomorrow, sitting in the front row, just like always." The morning of the performance, Akiko arrived at the Tokyo Metropolitan Concert Hall 2 hours early. The grand building with its sweeping architecture made her feel tiny. Backstage was a flurry of activity. Stagehands moving equipment, orchestra members warming up, administrators checking schedules. A kind-faced woman with a clipboard showed Akiko to a small practice room. "You can warm up here," she said. "Your performance begins at 10:30. I'll come get you at 10:15. Alone in the practice room with a beautiful grand piano, Akiko took several deep breaths. She removed the lucky charm her mother had given her years ago from her pocket, a small jade piano, and placed it on top of the piano. Then she began her warm-up routine, starting with simple scales to loosen her fingers. At 10:15 sharp, the woman returned. "Ready? The orchestra is in position." Walking onto the stage, Akiko was surprised by how bright the lights were. She could barely make out the audience, which was a relief. The hall was designed to seat over 2,000 people, but for a morning program on the third day, She expected only a small crowd of dedicated festival attendees and critics. The conductor, a tall man with silver hair, shook her hand warmly. "I enjoyed our rehearsal," he said. "Just play as you did then and we'll follow your lead." Akiko nodded, then took her place at the magnificent concert grand piano. As her fingers touched the keys, the world around her faded away. There was only Chopin now, only the music that had lived in her heart for so long. The concerto began with the orchestra introducing the main themes before the piano made its entrance. Akiko used these moments to center herself, to become one with the music that was about to flow through her. When it was time for her solo entrance, she played with a confidence that surprised even herself. The first movement was bold and dramatic, showcasing technical brilliance. Akiko's fingers flew across the keys with precision and passion. The second movement shifted to something more intimate and lyrical, the secret telling that Professor Nakamura had described. The third and final movement was a joyful dance, full of Polish folk influences that Chopin had loved. Throughout the performance, Akiko was vaguely aware that something unusual was happening in the hall. During the second movement, she noticed movement in her peripheral vision, people entering from the side doors, standing at the back. By the third movement, she could sense that the energy in the room had changed, grown somehow. When the final notes faded away, there was a moment of complete silence. Then came applause, far more applause than she had expected for a morning performance. As her eyes adjusted to the stage lights, Akiko realized with shock that the hall was nearly full. People were standing in the aisles at the back of the hall, anywhere they could find space. The conductor gestured for her to stand and take a bow. As she did, the applause grew even louder. He leaned close to her ear and said, "Word spread through the festival. People left other performances to come hear you. I've never seen anything like it." Akiko took another bow, her legs shaking slightly. She spotted her parents in the front row, her mother openly crying, her father standing tall with pride shining on his face. Mr. Tanaka and Professor Nakamura were nearby, the old professor actually smiling, something Akiko had seen perhaps twice in all the years she'd known him. As she left the stage, a young man approached her with a phone in his hand. "Miss Yamamoto," he said excitedly. "I hope you don't mind, but I've been live streaming your performance on social media. It's already been viewed by over 10,000 people." Akiko stared at him, not fully comprehending what he was saying. Live streaming? Social media? These were things that existed in a different world from her daily life of practice rooms and music scores. "People are calling you the Chopin girl," he continued, showing her his phone screen where comments were flooding in faster than she could read them. "They're saying you play like you were born in Warsaw, not Kyoto." Before she could respond, she was surrounded by festival officials, orchestra members wanting to congratulate her, and even a few music critics hoping for comments. It was overwhelming, especially for someone who had always expressed herself better through piano keys than words. Her parents managed to reach her side, creating a small bubble of calm in the chaos. Her mother hugged her tightly. "So many people," she whispered. "Did you see?" Akiko nodded, still trying to process everything. "I don't understand what happened. It was just a morning program." Her father smiled. "Something special happened, Akiko. Something that can't be planned or manufactured. You connected with the music in a way that made people want to listen. That's rare, even among professional musicians." As they made their way through the backstage area, Akiko's phone began buzzing nonstop with notifications. The live stream had now been viewed by over 50,000 people and was still climbing. Comments were pouring in from around the world, many in languages she couldn't even identify. By evening, the video had surpassed 200,000 views. The Chopin girl was trending on multiple platforms. Festival organizers, sensing an unexpected phenomenon, quickly arranged for a professional recording of her performance to be made available. That night, back in their hotel room, Akiko sat quietly by the window, looking out at the Tokyo skyline. The jade piano charm was clutched in her hand. "Are you okay?" her mother asked gently. "It's been an overwhelming day." Akiko turned to her with wonder in her eyes. "I just wanted to play Chopin the way I hear him in my heart," she said. "I never imagined so many people would want to listen." Her mother sat beside her. "The world is always waiting for authentic voices," she said. "Today, yours was heard." As the city lights twinkled below, Akiko knew that her life had just changed in ways she couldn't yet fully understand. But one thing remained certain. The music that had been her companion since childhood would continue to guide her path forward, wherever it might lead. Akiko's phone alarm went off at 6 in the morning, just like any other school day. She reached for it groggily, then froze as she noticed the screen. Over 300 notifications had come in overnight. The events of yesterday rushed back into her mind. The performance, the unexpected crowd, the live stream that had somehow reached hundreds of thousands of people. For a moment, she considered pulling the covers over her head and pretending it was all a dream. Instead, she got up, washed her face, and put on her school uniform. Famous or not, she still had a math test today. As she entered the kitchen, her parents were already awake, speaking in hushed tones. They stopped when they saw her. "Good morning," her father said, a bit too brightly. "How did you sleep?" "Okay," Akiko lied. In truth, she had tossed and turned, replaying the performance in her mind, wondering what would happen next. "I should get going." "I don't want to be late." Her mother exchanged a look with her father. "Akiko, perhaps you should stay home today. There have been some developments." "What kind of developments?" Akiko asked, pausing with her toast halfway to her mouth. Her father cleared his throat. "Well, for one thing, there are several reporters outside our apartment building." Akiko nearly choked. "Reporters, why?" "The video of your performance has now been viewed over 1 million times," her mother explained gently. "You've become an overnight sensation. People are calling from all over. Music magazines, television shows, concert halls. Mr. Tanaka has been fielding calls since dawn." Akiko set down her toast, no longer hungry. "But I just played Chopin. That's all I did." Her father smiled. "Sometimes that's all it takes. The right moment, the right music, the right performer, and something magical happens." The doorbell rang, making them all jump. Her mother went to answer it, speaking in low tones to whoever was there. When she returned, she was holding a bouquet of flowers so large she could barely see over it. "From the Polish embassy," she said, setting them down on the table. "The ambassador wants to invite you to a special reception next week." The phone rang again. It had been ringing all morning, but they'd been ignoring it. This time her father answered. "Yes, she's here, but she's not giving interviews today." "Yes, I'll tell her. Thank you." He hung up and turned to Akiko. "The Tokyo Symphony Orchestra. They want to feature you in their upcoming season." Akiko sat down heavily, trying to process everything. Yesterday, she had been a promising young pianist with a few competition wins. Today, she was... What exactly? She didn't feel any different. Her fingers were the same fingers, her love for Chopin was the same love. "What do I do now?" she asked, looking from her mother to her father, hoping they had answers. Her father sat beside her. "You don't have to do anything right away. We can take some time to think, to make a plan. There's no rush." But it seemed the world had other ideas. By noon, Mr. Tanaka had arrived with a notepad full of offers and invitations. The Tokyo Metropolitan Concert Hall wanted her back for a solo recital. 3 international music festivals had reached out. A record label was interested in a recording contract. "This is unprecedented," Mr. Tanaka said, looking both excited and concerned. Most pianists work their entire lives for opportunities like these. Akiko's head was spinning. "I can't just leave school. I have exams coming up. And what about my regular lessons? I still have so much to learn." Her parents and Mr. Tanaka exchanged glances. "Perhaps we need to rethink what your education looks like now," Mr. Tanaka suggested carefully. "Many young musicians at your level study privately while pursuing their careers." "My career?" Akiko repeated, the word feeling strange in her mouth. At 17, she hadn't thought much about careers. The piano had always been her passion, but suddenly it was becoming something else, something bigger and more complicated. That afternoon, a visitor arrived whom they hadn't expected. Professor Nakamura, who rarely left his home except for special occasions, appeared at their door. He looked even more frail than at the festival, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. "I needed to see you," he told Akiko without preamble. "Before all of this goes to your head." Akiko bowed respectfully, then led him to their living room where both pianos stood. He lowered himself carefully onto the bench of the better piano, motioning for Akiko to sit beside him. "Play for me," he commanded. "Not Chopin. Bach, the Prelude in C minor." Akiko was surprised but did as he asked. The Bach piece was one she had worked on years ago, technically demanding but less emotionally expressive than the romantic composers she favored. When she finished, Professor Nakamura nodded once. Now play it again. But this time remember that Bach lost his first wife and 11 of his 20 children. Remember that he was once thrown in jail for trying to leave his employer. Remember that he was human before he was a genius. Akiko played again, this time seeing the notes differently. Not just as a mathematical pattern, but as the creation of a man who had known great joy and terrible sorrow. When she finished, there were tears in her eyes. That, Professor Nakamura said quietly, is what made your Chopin special. Not your technique, though it's very good. Not your memory, though it's excellent. What touched all those people was your humanity coming through the music. He tapped her gently on the chest over her heart. Don't lose this in the excitement of what's coming. Without it, you're just another skilled technician. And the world has plenty of those. Akiko nodded, understanding the importance of what he was telling her. Now, he continued, his tone becoming practical, you need proper management. Not just your well-meaning parents and Mr. Tanaka, though they have done admirably. You need someone who knows the international music world. He handed her a business card. This woman managed 3 of my former students who now play with major orchestras. Call her. The following days passed in a blur. Akiko's parents decided she would take a short break from school to deal with the immediate opportunities. The woman Professor Nakamura had recommended, Mrs. Ishida, took over managing the constant stream of requests. She was brisk, efficient, and fiercely protective of Akiko. No interviews until we're ready, she declared. No performances until we've selected the right venues. And absolutely no record deal until we've considered all options. She's 17, not 37. We're going to do this right. With Mrs. Ishida creating a buffer between Akiko and the suddenly clamoring world, the young pianist had space to think. She spent hours at the piano, not just practicing but reflecting. What did she really want? Was she ready for what was happening? One evening, she found her mother sitting alone in the kitchen, looking at old photo albums. Akiko sat beside her and saw a picture of herself at age 5, sitting at their old upright piano, her legs dangling far above the floor. You were so small, her mother said, smiling at the memory, but so determined. Do you remember what you told me when I asked why you practiced so hard? Akiko shook her head. You said, because the music is inside me and needs to come out. It was such a grown-up thing for a little girl to say. Akiko traced the outline of her younger self in the photograph. I still feel that way, she said softly. The music is still inside me. It's just that now so many more people want to hear it. Her mother put an arm around her shoulders. Then that's your answer. Keep letting the music out the way you always have. The rest is just logistics. With that simple but profound guidance, Akiko began to find her footing in her new reality. Mrs. Ishida helped her create a schedule that balanced performances with continued study. Mr. Tanaka arranged for her to work with several master teachers, including a former student of a student of Chopin himself, a living link to the composer who had captured her heart. Her first official concert after the viral performance was held at Suntory Hall in Tokyo, one of Japan's most prestigious venues. Unlike the festival performance, this time Akiko knew people were coming specifically to hear her. The 2,000-seat hall sold out in under an hour. Backstage before the performance, Akiko felt a familiar fluttering of nerves. She held her jade piano charm and closed her eyes, centering herself. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. 5 minutes, Miss Yamamoto, a stagehand called. As Akiko made her way to the stage, she caught a glimpse of the audience through a gap in the curtains. The hall was filled with people of all ages. Elderly music lovers, young students, families, critics with their notebooks, all there to hear her play. For a moment, the weight of their expectations felt crushing. Then she remembered Professor Nakamura tapping her chest. Don't lose this. And her own childish words, the music is inside me and needs to come out. With those thoughts guiding her, Akiko walked onto the stage. The applause was thunderous, but she barely heard it. There was only the gleaming piano waiting for her, and the music that lived in her heart. The program she had chosen was deliberate, beginning with Bach, moving through Mozart and Beethoven, and ending with Chopin. It was like telling the story of her own journey as a pianist, from the structured beauty of Bach that Professor Nakamura had insisted she master, to the emotional depths of Chopin that had always called to her soul. When she played the final piece, Chopin's Ballade No. 1, the same one that had won her the national competition, there was a palpable electricity in the hall. Every note seemed to hang in the air a moment longer than physically possible. The audience was so silent that Akiko could hear the mechanical sounds of the piano itself, the soft thud of the hammers, the whisper of the pedals. As the final notes faded away, there was that magical moment of silence that she had come to recognize, the space between the end of the music and the beginning of the world again. Then came the applause, rising like a wave, washing over her as she stood and bowed. Afterward, at the reception, a young girl approached her clutching a program. "I started piano lessons last month," she said shyly. "My teacher showed us your video. Someday I want to play like you." Akiko smiled, remembering herself at that age. The wonder, the determination, the pure love of music. "Keep practicing," she told the girl. "The piano has so many secrets to share with you." Later that night, as her parents drove her home, her father asked, "How does it feel? Your first solo concert at Suntory Hall at 17? Akiko looked out at the Tokyo lights. "It feels like the beginning of something," she said. "Not just for me, but for everyone who was there. That's what music does. It creates new beginnings." Her father nodded, understanding. "And what comes next?" Akiko smiled, thinking of all the music still waiting to be played, all the emotions still waiting to be expressed, all the connections still waiting to be made. "Everything," she said simply. "Everything comes next." 6 months had passed since Akiko's life-changing performance at the Tokyo International Music Festival. Winter had given way to spring, and cherry blossoms filled the parks of Tokyo with soft pink clouds. For Akiko, these months had been a whirlwind of concerts, interviews, and difficult decisions. The most difficult decision had come 3 months earlier, when she had to choose between continuing her regular schooling or accepting an invitation to audition for the prestigious Juilliard School in New York. After many late-night family discussions, tears, and soul-searching, Akiko had decided to finish her high school education through a special program for young artists, while preparing for the international stage. "Your technique is already exceptional," Mrs. Ishida had told her. "But to truly become a world-class pianist, you need to experience different teachers, different audiences, different perspectives on music." And so, on a bright April morning, Akiko found herself sitting in a spacious dressing room at Carnegie Hall in New York City, thousands of miles from the small apartment in Kyoto, where her journey had begun. Outside, a line of people stretched around the block, waiting for the doors to open. The 2,800-seat venue had sold out within hours of tickets becoming available for The Chopin Girl, Akiko Yamamoto's American debut. Akiko stared at her reflection in the mirror. She looked different somehow, more mature than the schoolgirl who had once rushed home to practice piano. Her hair was styled elegantly, and she wore a simple but beautiful black dress that Mrs. Ishida had helped her select. But her eyes were the same, carrying the same mixture of wonder and determination they had always held. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Yamamoto? They're ready for the sound check," a stagehand said in English. Akiko nodded and followed him through the backstage area. As they walked, she passed framed photographs of legendary musicians who had performed on this same stage. Vladimir Horowitz, Arthur Rubinstein, Martha Argerich. She paused briefly at Argerich's photo, remembering how she had once tacked a poster of the great pianist on her bedroom wall in Kyoto. Now, she would play on the same stage where her idol had once performed. The stagehand led her onto the stage, where a magnificent Steinway grand piano waited. The hall was empty except for a few technicians adjusting lights and sound equipment. Akiko sat at the piano, running her fingers lightly over the keys, getting a feel for their weight and response. "Whenever you're ready," called a voice from the sound booth. Akiko closed her eyes for a moment, then began to play a passage from Chopin's Nocturne in B-flat minor. The notes floated upward into the perfect acoustics of the hall, each one crystal clear yet somehow part of a larger whole. She stopped after a minute. "How does it sound?" she called out. "Beautiful," came the reply. "But can you play something with more dynamics? We need to check the levels." Akiko nodded and launched into a section of Chopin's revolutionary etude, her fingers flying across the keys as the music built from a whisper to a thunderous crescendo. When she finished, there was a moment of silence, then applause from the small crew scattered around the hall. "Perfect," the sound engineer said. "We're all set." Back in her dressing room, Akiko found her parents waiting. They had arrived in New York just yesterday, still slightly dazed from the long flight and the surreal reality that their daughter was about to perform at Carnegie Hall. "How does it feel?" her father asked, helping her adjust the collar of her dress. "Big," Akiko said simply. "Not just the hall, but everything. Like I'm standing at the edge of something enormous." Her mother squeezed her hand. "But you're ready." It wasn't a question, but Akiko nodded anyway. "I think I am." Another knock on the door announced Mrs. Ishida, elegant as always in a navy blue suit. 30 minutes, Akiko. The house is full, and I've just been told that 3 of the world's top piano teachers are in attendance. Also the music director from the Berlin Philharmonic and representatives from 4 record labels. She paused, noticing Akiko's wide eyes. "But don't think about any of that. Just play like you always do, from your heart." When Mrs. Ishida left, Akiko's father chuckled. "She tells you who's out there, then tells you not to think about it. Very helpful." Akiko smiled, grateful for her father's ability to make her laugh even at the most nerve-wracking moments. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the jade piano charm, now slightly worn from years of being held before performances. "I'll be holding this the whole time," her mother promised, taking it from her. "Just like I did at your first recital." The final minutes before the performance passed in a blur. Akiko did her usual warm-up routine, moving her fingers rapidly but silently through the air, visualizing the most challenging passages of her program. She took slow, deep breaths, centering herself. When the stagehand came to escort her to the stage, her parents hugged her one last time. "Remember what Professor Nakamura told you?" her father whispered. "Your humanity is what makes your music special." Akiko nodded, then followed the stagehand through the corridor that led to the stage. She could hear the buzz of the audience, the rustle of programs, the occasional cough or whisper. Then, as she stepped onto the stage, a hush fell over the hall. The spotlights were bright, making it difficult to see the audience clearly, but Akiko could feel their presence, thousands of people who had come to hear her play. She walked to the piano, adjusted the bench, and took a moment to compose herself. Then she began. Her program was carefully chosen to tell a story. Her story. It began with a piece by a Japanese composer that evoked the landscape of her homeland. Then came works by Liszt and Rachmaninoff that showcased her technical abilities. But the heart of the program, as always, was Chopin, a selection of his most beautiful and challenging works, culminating in the Ballade No. 4, often considered his most profound composition. As she played, Akiko felt a strange sensation, as if time were both stretching and compressing. Each note seemed to take forever to sound, yet whole movements passed in what felt like seconds. She was intensely aware of every nuance of the music, the tension of a suspended chord, the release of a resolution, the dance-like rhythm of a mazurka, yet also somehow outside of it. Watching herself play from a distance, most importantly, she felt connected to the piano, to the composers whose works she was interpreting, to the audience hanging on every note, and to the long line of pianists who had sat on this same stage over the decades. It was as if they were all engaged in a great conversation across time and space, with music as their shared language. When Akiko struck the final chord of the ballad, there was that magical moment of silence that she had come to treasure, the space between music and reality. Then the applause began, building slowly at first, then erupting into a roar as the audience rose to their feet. Akiko stood and bowed deeply, then again and again as the applause continued. She left the stage, then returned for an encore, then another. Finally, after her third encore, a gentle, heartfelt rendition of Chopin's Prelude in E minor, she placed her hand over her heart and bowed one last time. Backstage, she was enveloped in a flurry of activity. Her parents were there, tears streaming down their faces. Mrs. Ishida was fielding congratulations from industry professionals. Reporters were clamoring for quotes. But through it all, Akiko felt a strange sense of calm, as if she had finally arrived exactly where she was meant to be. Later that night, after the post-concert reception had ended and the interviews were done, Akiko sat with her parents in their hotel room, looking out at the twinkling lights of New York City. "Do you remember," her mother asked, "when you were little and you told me that the music was inside you and needed to come out?" Akiko nodded. "I think now," her mother continued, "the music is flowing both ways. It comes from you, but it also comes back to you from everyone who hears it. That's why people connect with your playing so deeply." Her father, who had been quietly listening, added, "I spoke with an older gentleman after the concert. He told me he had heard all the great pianists of the last 50 years and that your playing reminded him why he fell in love with music in the first place. He said you made Chopin sound both timeless and brand new." Akiko took this in, humbled by the impact her music was having. "What happens now?" she asked, echoing the question she had asked 6 months ago when her video first went viral. This time the answer came more easily. In the morning she would meet with representatives from Juilliard to discuss her audition, which was now more a formality than a test. Next week she would return to Japan for a series of concerts before beginning a European tour in the summer. There were recording sessions planned, collaborations with orchestras, master classes with legendary teachers. But beyond these logistics, Akiko now understood that her journey with music would be lifelong. The 17-year-old girl who had stunned the world with Chopin was just beginning to discover the depths of what was possible when heart, hands, and harmony aligned. As the lights of the city sparkled below, Akiko thought about all the young pianists who might be inspired by her story, practicing in small apartments, on old upright pianos, dreaming of someday sharing their music with the world. She thought about the power of a single performance to change a life, and how that change could ripple outward, touching countless others. "I want to play again," she said, suddenly standing up. "Not for an audience, not for critics or teachers or record labels. Just for the joy of it." Her parents exchanged smiles. This was the Akiko they had always known. The little girl who couldn't pass a piano without wanting to touch it, who heard music in everything around her. "I'm sure the hotel has a piano somewhere," her father said. "Let's go find it." And so, well past midnight in a grand New York hotel, a small family from Kyoto found themselves in an empty ballroom with a beautiful piano. As Akiko played, softly, intimately, just for them, her parents sat nearby, listening to the music that had always been inside their daughter, now flowing outward to touch the world. In that quiet moment, as Chopin's notes filled the empty room, the past, present, and future seemed to converge. There was the child Akiko had been, the young artist she was becoming, and all the possibilities that still lay ahead, a lifetime of music, connection, and discovery. And at the heart of it all was a simple truth that had never changed. When Akiko Yamamoto played the piano, people stopped to listen. Not because of technique or fame or viral videos, but because in her music, they heard something authentic and deeply human, the sound of one heart speaking directly to another through the timeless language of Chopin.